Chapter 10, Ski Tip Ranch. Guests, guests, guests. Thank God there's still enough of the old timers left to have made running a ski lodge for 25 years a lot of fun. Over the years, we have seen the change in guests at Ski Tip Ranch. The very first guests at Ski Tip set the mood. Skiers were not very clothes conscious in those days. I remember well the late Fred Iceland standing in front of our fireplace saying, "When I first came to Aspen to teach skiing, my ski pants were baggy and my face was smooth. Now my ski pants are sleek and smooth and..." Most of our guests were wonderful, but even the few exceptions weren't all that bad. I was still working at the courthouse 5.5 days a week. In the fall of 1949, a jolly Swiss fellow appeared at Ski Tip. He was looking for a place that would sleep and feed about 10 or 12 skiers over Thanksgiving. We had moved out of the original 2 rooms of the old cabin and were using the new wing with dining room, kitchen, and living room. The big stone fireplace in the living room was all finished. 4 large windows at the end of the living room had no glass in them as yet. We had found a substitute that we could afford to buy. It was a soft plastic type material which was used in chicken coops to let in light. By fastening a sheet of this to the outside of the windows, another sheet to the inside, it let in enough light. This gave the room a diffused white Japanesey effect. When the wind blew, the 2 sheets would reverberate, giving off a drum-like sound. Hadn't we learned about borrowing money, we could buy 12 Army surplus bunks and enough bedding. 6 skiers would sleep in each of the 2 downstairs rooms. We assured the happy Swiss right then that we could take care of the group. To the bank we went. With the loan, we were even able to buy a dresser for each room. We put up hooks for their clothes. The one bathroom we had was right next door to these rooms. We were in business, the ski lodge business. Thanksgiving approached with no group, no word from anyone. We had never thought to ask for a deposit. It had never crossed our minds. Bess Moore was to help me plan the dinner. The evening before Thanksgiving, the phone rang. "Could you take in 2 fellows? We're from London, but working in Chicago, where we heard your names mentioned at a ski club meeting. If we catch the Burlington Zephyr tonight and then the bus from Denver in the morning, we understand we'll reach you by afternoon." I was nervously awaiting the arrival of our first guest. What will we charge them, I wondered. Late in the afternoon, here came a rental car right up to the back door. "Are you from Chicago?" I asked the 2 men who got out. "Why, yes," they both answered. "Oh, you're English. Come right in." I ushered them through the kitchen and on into the living room. They looked at each other and smiled. English? Of course, out here maybe we are. I put them in the men's dorm and showed them the bathroom. The 2 bona fide Englishmen arrived just at that moment. I looked at the other 2 men. "We're not imposters, Mrs. Dercum," said the one whose name was Max. "We just thought that maybe out here we had to be English to get in." Little did I dream that these would be the first of many guests who would return season after season. Pat Lee and John Hogg, the Londoners, came from Chicago every weekend for the entire season. Max Schiff and Jack Wachowski also came from Chicago almost as often. The next year, John was transferred to the Kansas City office of Lloyd's of London. He could not catch a train that would get him into Denver on Saturday morning in order to meet Pat, who arrived from Chicago. Therefore, John bought an old car. He would drive at 90 miles an hour all night, arriving at Denver's Union Station in time to meet Pat. They would then drive to Arapahoe Basin. They'd ski like mad all day, come down to Ski Tip to party all evening, and then they would ski all day Sunday, heading back home that evening. The Wild Englishmen, the rest of the guests dubbed them. I was glad I didn't have to see how they looked at their offices on Monday morning. We were sorry to see them transferred back to London, but whenever they returned to the States, they would call us and would come by if it were ski season. A third fellow, Dick Hart, joined Max S. and Jack W. When they were there, we had such lively, crazy times. Our friendship grew. One time when we were adding a new wing onto Ski Tip, we needed $3,000 to get it finished. I called Max S. asking for help. To make it all legal, here came, from the three of them, separate checks for $1,000 each. There were 3 notes for us to sign at 2% interest, but no date for payment. Years later, when our son Rolf was granted a Denver University ski team scholarship, he appeared at the dean's office. However, his papers did not have the necessary authorization for his athletic scholarship. Willie Schaeffler, who was in Europe at the time, would have to okay it. Rolf was told. We knew that as soon as Willie returned, he'd sign, but Rolf had to get entered now. He needed $2,000, which would be refunded as soon as Willie returned. I called Max Schiff in his office in Chicago and fortunately caught him. It's in the mail in 10 minutes, Edna, and there won't be any notes to sign. I always told you and Max that if you needed any help for those kids of yours, to just call me. As soon as Willie was back, we refunded the money to Max. No wonder many guests, like Max, felt they were part of Ski Tip. It was often a little complicated having only the 2 dorm rooms those first years at Ski Tip Ranch. There were 3 double-deck bunks in each dorm, 1 room for girls, 1 for boys. If couples came, they would have to split up. Nobody had complained so far. Being among fellow skiers, eating with friends, and talking over the day on the slopes together in the evenings before a big roaring fire seemed to make up for any shortcomings. There was an exception one day. I was showing a new guest where he would sleep, thinking he'd be pleased to have come early enough to claim a lower bunk. He turned to me and said, "But I've got $200 on me." Just then a good friend of ours, Harry Baum, strode into the dorm. "I'll take an upper bunk, Edna," he told me. He threw his rucksack up to the bunk. Turning to smile at the other fellow, Harry was as astonished as I was at the man's expression. It was complete fright. "I can't sleep here," stated the newcomer. "I told you I have $200 on me." He held his hand over his back pocket. I wanted to laugh, thinking that Harry probably had more than that on him, and thought nothing of it. Harry Baum, years later, bought the entire Breckenridge ski area. I put up a cot in our cramped and dusty laundry room for the nervous guest, and was glad to see him leave the next morning. Curly Mackey, an old miner from Breckenridge, became a part of the Ski Tip staff that first winter. When summer came, he and Max decided we needed more rooms. A new wing was added on the north end of the building. We cut the logs from our own property, all of us helping load them onto the truck, driving them to our little sawmill, and then to the lodge where we would peel them. We couldn't afford to hire the Swedes from Keystone Village to square and hand hew them for us. We put up the logs round as they were. My job was to chink these. As the winter wore on, the logs would shrink a bit here and there, away from the chinking. This let into the rooms a little more fresh air, some blowing and drifting snow, and definitely more daylight. One morning at breakfast, a new guest timidly stated, "My room wasn't very warm," only to be scornfully put down by the rest of the guests. "What do you want? Egg in your beer? Or how about some pheasant under glass?"